New World Wars are going to be 40 versus 40, down from 50 versus 50, and I think that this is an important change and perhaps one that I'm not overly thrilled about because of the reasons why I think they are doing it. So they have put out some notes regarding the PTR2 update, which basically changes that are coming to the March patch, but they weren't in the initial set of changes, but they've added it to the PTR2, and there's a couple of interesting things in there, but the war one being the big one in my eyes. So if you read the patch notes, it simply says wars have been adjusted to 40v40 participants, and it doesn't really give you any explanation of why, and therefore we are left to ponder that ourselves. For me, there's two possible reasons for this, and I think it's definitely one of them rather than the other, but let me explain. One possible reason would be that the player base simply can't sustain 50v50 wars. I don't think that is true. Most servers you're sort of able to couple together like 50v50 players. Obviously if you're on a dead server that may be questionable, but that is just something that we're going to have to deal with. But on servers where you've got 600 people plus, wars tend to be relatively okay in terms of getting the numbers. So I personally don't think it is that option. What I do think it is that 50v50 wars are prone to lagging, and they've obviously not been able to get rid of that lag completely, and one of their solutions is to simply remove 20 people from the battlefield, because quite clearly if you take out 20 people all casting spells and effects and stuff like that, you sort of expect an improvement in performance. This to me is a little bit like giving up that, hey, we tried to do 50v50 and we failed, therefore we're going to have to do something else. Now, whether or not that's a limitation because of the game's coding or it's actually just a limitation of server performance, I don't really know. It's a little bit interesting when you see other games that have potentially trying to get bigger wars, and I'm talking about Ashes of Creation, as opposed to other games where they've actually had to scale down because they were having similar issues. All I'm saying is this change from 50v50 to 40v40 is probably because of lag and server performance, and I think that's unfortunate when your game is getting curtailed by essentially logistical problems, be it either physical constraints that they can't overcome with servers or just bad coding. Whatever the reason is, it's unfortunate anyway. And then what are the knock-on effects to this? Well, I just mentioned them. There'll be 20 people who would have been in that war who will now no longer be in that war, and on the surface that will obviously decrease the amount of people who are participating in wars. Now, the fact that they've done this at the same time that they are basically going to make it so that wars are a bit more win and losable, if that makes sense, because of the spawn points, that means there's probably going to be more wars that change hands, which means there's probably going to be more wars. Be a planned thing to some extent. However, I still think that the game has quite a few issues with maybe one company holding too many territories, because there's invasions that sort of split up the times, and then they're doing stuff where they're getting a second company to essentially hold that territory and then set it at a different schedule time and all that kind of stuff. Personally, they've not gone far enough for me to see them reduce this to think that it's anything other than a negative, because all they're going to do is reduce 20 people from doing something that they want to do. However, the performance of wars might be welcomed by the people who are in those wars, because quite frankly, you don't want to be in a laggy war, because then you're complaining about that rather than actually concentrating on the in-game stuff. But for me, that takes away 10 slots that players would have got on your faction, and you're going to be a little bit annoyed by that if you are now not getting in. And then just looking at this PTR update, they're also adding a health and mana regen when you're out of combat, and I can imagine some people saying that that basically negates the point of food. That makes basically food being something you want in combat rather than out of combat. The Void Gauntlet route is getting changed from 2 seconds to 1 second. Roots is a whole kettle of fish that I don't really want to talk about here, but pretty strong nerf. An interesting one is that your tokens from your daily faction quests will now be increased by 5 times. That's insane. That makes getting your faction tokens a lot easier. And a bit of me thinks that that might be a little bit too much, but it is what it is. Blight Seeds are now epic instead of legendary, so no longer will you be trolled. And then there's a couple of changes that are on the PTR that they're working, so there's some changes to the expedition. Sort of sounds like they're nerfing Tempest's Heart a little bit because maybe it was a bit difficult. You can go check out the notes yourself if you want. And there was a patch yesterday, which obviously I've not made a video since, so I'll just quickly talk about them. One of them being the input buffering with weapons and stuff like that appears to have been fixed. I've not seen anybody complain about that so far on the forums, etc., so hopefully that is now resolved. And finally, the expedition orb timers are apparently now correct. However, I thought they were going to reset it for everybody. However, if you bought your mutator just before this went live, well, you've got to wait your 7 days. You're not going to get it once every 3 days, so you're sort of poo out of luck basically, unfortunately. So yeah, on one hand I like a lot of the changes that they do, but this change to 40v40 war, it's the first time where I've actually felt like the developers are basically admitting that the game is suffering a little bit and they basically can't like deliver that. They said they would do something and they can't deliver it, and I think it's causing too much lag, so they're just pulling the plug a little bit and going to 40v40, 20 people however in each war, and are gonna not get to participate, and I think that's just unfortunate. It's one of those issues where like it's sort of understandable but unfortunate. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have a most beautiful day, like and subscribe, come follow me on Twitch. Goodbye.